Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is Rob and Rob's Game Group. Hope everybody's doing good. Today I am going to be reviewing the Into the Desert Night campaign, which is the Vampire Kingdoms campaign in the Blood and Banes book for SavageWorlds RIFTS. My group recently finished it up, so I thought I would do a video talking about my likes or dislikes of it. First of all, I'd like to say that this book, I don't know that the campaign was, but I know that the book in general was written mainly by Sean and Robin Bircher. I'm not super familiar with their work other than this book. There was additional writing or additional material provided by Bill Keyes, Simon Lucas, Sean Owen Robertson, and Eddie Webb. And I don't know who wrote the campaign because it doesn't say that in here, but the Birchers, I'm assuming they're husband and wife. I don't know, they could be brother and sister for all I know. I don't know them. But I'm not reviewing the entire book. I've already done a, take a look at the book type thing and see what's in it. And that video is already on my channel. You can go take a look at it. I will save you time and tell you that the book is amazing. This is my favorite book of the Savage Rifts books. So let me preface with that it is absolutely my favorite. So it stands to reason that for the first game, excuse me, the first campaign, I wanted to run the one that was in here and see what they did. I do write a lot of my own campaigns, but they had a campaign here, so why not, right? It's called Into the Desert Night, and it has an adventure setup that is right here. And in this adventure setup, there are 5 linked adventures, and in between each adventure, there's a space called Adventure Generator where you can use the Adventure Generator or write your own adventure to put in there to kind of help the story flow organically. But you don't have to. You could just run the stories back to back. I did a little of both. So I'm just going to go page by page through the campaign and kind of look at some of the stuff that I want to touch on as far as my thoughts on it. So when the campaign opens, the players are venturing south to the edges of the Vampire Kingdoms in search of new allies for the Tomorrow Legion's cause. So that sentence right there made me and the players feel like they had very little knowledge of the Vampire Kingdoms. They had not experienced vampires before. And the first vampire encounter they have is with wild vampires on their way to Ciudad Juarez. And in that, it literally says the intent of this encounter is to expose the Legionnaires to the unthinking fury of wild vampires. So we assume from the way it's written that they are not familiar with fighting vampires. So the way I ran it, they had the slightest knowledge of folklore on vampires, but not like they had not been trained to fight vampires. Which in Rifts and Vampire Kingdoms could be very detrimental when you run into a bunch of vampires. And the first encounter had 2 per hero. I have a group of 6 players, so it's 12 wild vampires right out the gate. That's not the first encounter in the book. It's just the first vampire encounter. And that's in the Tales from the Table episode that I did on it. They actually played a card that had an actual vampire hunter show up when they were down there and give them some information and help them out. Of course, it also turns out that about half his information was wrong. But it was a learning process for them to learn about the vampires. And that is a neat way to go about it. But if you run this, I would push your players to spend some time talking to Erin Tarn, because she is at the Tomorrow Legion. She's one of the founding members of the Tomorrow Legion. And this is after she's already written her book, Traversing Our Modern World. And she's been to the Vampire Kingdom, so she knows some stuff about them. Have them spend some time talking to her so that they know what kind of weapons they need to be making and trying to acquire that are going to be helpful. Yeah, 300 grenades, not really helpful. super soakers, wooden crosses, wooden stakes. That's helpful. So they'll find some of their attacks much more useful if they properly arm themselves going in. Now, the campaign did open with the first adventure, which was City on the Edge of Night, where they are trying to get to Ciudad Juarez. The first encounter they actually run into, which I think, as far as the written encounters, is the only non-vampire encounter in the story, was Chupacabras, and they get attacked, and there's 3 per party member, so it's like, what? It's a bunch. Yeah, 3 per party member. Good Lord. Yeah, I don't have that many miniatures for Chupacabras. So what I did, and I talked about this in Tales from the Table, was I changed the adventure and I had them ambushed by Pecos Raiders instead, because I also wanted them to get a chance to use their regular weapons and feel pretty powerful. And they did, because they laid waste to these raiders like it wasn't nothing. But then shortly after that's when they run into their first wild vampires. And then they reach Ciudad Juarez. Ciudad Juarez is very well laid out in the original RIFTS from Palladium Vampire Kingdoms book. They hit a lot of the highlights in here. I thought they did a good job of giving you enough to go on that you could run a game there. There's a pretty interesting sub-story going on in the city that they do take part in before venturing out into the wilds. And I enjoyed that part of it. They enjoyed that part of it the best because there was combat, but it was a mixture of combat and a lot of role playing and sneaking around and doing things, and it was just a lot of fun. I'm not going to go over the adventures that I inserted into it because I did them. You can watch Tales from the Table episodes and see that. They were mainly put in there a little bit to advance the story, but more to break the monotony of just vampires. Sometimes it was to give them demons to fight or whatever. But I'm just going to focus on the stuff that's in the campaign, not the stuff where I inserted from Adventure Generator. So the next adventure in here is the Lone Ranger, where they are defending an outpost and Evie Rodriguez shows up. No, this is before that. This is when they find out about the daytime vampires. Lone Ranger. They find the sole survivor, which is Jack Garland, who is on the verge of death when they find him being attacked at a homestead by secondary vampires that are using environmentally sealed suits and modern weapons and attacking during the daylight. And then, he, in his dying breath, he tells them, "Oh no, we have to tell Doc Reed they walk by day." So they do take that with them and start heading to Fort Reed. Then we get into All the Trouble in the Way. And this is the section, it's a village they come across that used to defend itself with a moat from an underground well. But that's dried up for the most part, and they've been getting hit nightly by these vampires using advanced military tactics. They've sent for reinforcements. The heroes show up about the same time as the reinforcement. Of course, the reinforcement is just one ranger, Evie Rodriguez. She shows up to assess the situation. And this fight was nasty. So I thought it was written well. The area was described well. I thought it was a great way to show the advanced tactics that were being used by the vampires. And it was a great way to insert Evie into the story so that she could make a connection with the players and lead them to Fort Reed later. The vampire attack, however, was rough because you had multiple lines of attack coming in. The first line had 3 wild vampires per hero, right? Then you had the second line, which had 2 wild vampires per hero. And then you had secondary vampires on top of that, a vampire commander, all with the ability to use puppet. Now, technically, all vampires in Rifts have the ability for psychic powers and can use puppet, among other things. But I don't use it with wild vampires because, in my mind, they're too monstrous to focus and use powers like that. But secondaries up, I will use it. Puppet is a very powerful spell or power or psychic power, however you want to call it, in the game, and you can basically shut things down. So the 2 water cannons they had on the towers they were using, those 2 guys, they put the 2 guys with weakest spirit up there. They got puppeted and then used to destroy the water cannons. The fort, the township got overrun, and it was a bad night. It was half the party was killed that night. The other half fled and hid in the river, basically. And we had players we actually had to decide at that point whether we wanted to continue with this or just go play something else. The fight was, though it was intended to show how strong the vampire force was and the military tactics they were using, because you had the wild vampires that were doing things like clogging the moats, attacking the walls. You also had secondary vampires with rail guns and all kind of stuff, and they were with the ability to use puppet. They were shutting people down, and it was just a bad night for the good guys. Like I said, half the party died that night, and Evie was badly hurt. They dug her out of the wreckage the next day, and what was left of the party made it to a small town where they could heal up a little bit before moving on to Fort Reed. And our other players met them there with new characters that they had made. And it's not like my players didn't come into this making rogue scholars and city rats. I mean, we had an AI construct, which is mechanically like one of the most broken, powerful, OP characters in the game. Not magic-wise, obviously, just from a mechanics and combat and toughness and the amount of damage output that he can do. But we had him, we had a crazy, we had a necromancer, we had a mind melter, we had a juicer, and a shifter. And that's a pretty powerful group of characters, and they got their asses kicked. Now, I understand heroes are going to get their asses kicked sometimes, and I understand player death because it happens in games I've written. It just does. But I felt like this particular fight was really, really heavy-handed towards the vampires. Like they were driving home the point of how dangerous these vampires were with a sledgehammer against a needle. It was just really overpowered. So my advice when you run this is maybe cut the number of vampires probably in half, and I would limit the secondary vampires again probably by half, because it just gets really overbearing really fast, especially when this battle is taking place at night. Those vampires are nasty, and when you have that many of them, you can potentially wipe your entire party. Had my last couple of guys not managed to just escape and run for their lives, it would have been a TPK that night. So, though I don't think that that particular encounter is badly written, I enjoyed the encounter, and the lead up to it was really nice, and the tie-in with Evie was really nice. The amount of vampires, and as powerful as they are, is just real heavy-handed. So I warn you, if you run this, you want to consider scaling the vampires back a little bit. Just my 2 cents. Anyway, they end up all hooking up with the new characters, and Evie leads them to Fort Reed, where they find out that Doc Reed is not a super nice guy. He is a good guy, but he is also crazy. And he thinks of himself as a divine instrument of God against the vampires. They disclose their information to him. Once he has all their information, he allows them to hang around and go on missions as observers, and they can observe and watch, you know, sermons and training within the fort, and they're welcome to stay there, but they're not allowed to participate in anything unless they become rangers. And the only way he'll allow them to become some of his rangers is if they forsake the Tomorrow Legion and swear allegiance to him. To which my players were like, yeah, we'll just lie to him about it, and because we're not going to turn on the Tomorrow Legion. Mainly because their characters had taken vows for the Tomorrow Legion. But they do end up spending time with Evie and Dirk Palmer, who is another ranger there that ends up being the leader of their group, or the leader of a group that they're sent out with. And they end up working with him and Evie. She's kind of the liaison for the party at that point. And they go on several missions together. And you can kind of stretch this part out as long as you want to. If you want to just fast track it, you could use quick encounters to represent, you know, multiple scouting missions or whatever that they go out on, and fights they get into with vampires. Or you can actually do it week by week if you want to, and you could stretch this out for 6 months and just have them fighting, you know, vampires after vampires at homesteads or mines or whatever. But that's really up to whoever the GM is as to how far into that they want to go. At some point, though, they do end up going out on a mission with Dirk and Evie, and Dirk leads them basically into an ambush in which a bunch of humans and Deathspike vampires in the middle of the day are laying in wait for the heroes and trying to kill them. Because as it turns out, Dirk has been working for the Deathspike the entire time. He's a traitor. He is not mind controlled by the vampires. He is a true believer. He is full on in hardcore belief that we should be serving the vampires. So much so, his last words are, "You'll never defeat Deathspike. They're sworn to destroy you. You're as good as dead. Bah ha!" And then he blows his own head up. Which was kind of ineffective because it was a small blast template and the players were able to jump out of the way with athletics checks. So the only person he managed to kill was him. It was probably good because they would have killed him regardless, or taken him in chains back to Doc Reed and let Doc Reed deal with him. However, he was a traitor, and through his possessions they also found out that he had been working for the Deathspike, or the vampires, all along, and had been feeding them information about not only this group but the Rangers, and he had been tasked with leading them into this ambush. So you have a little bit of betrayal there. And then you have the final adventure, which is kind of a big one. It's called Staking Deathspike. Sorry, that font's really weird on the page. Staking Deathspike, which is where they hunt down, zero in on, and find the Deathspike headquarters. In order to do this, they spend weeks triangulating sightings on a map from other ranger outfits that go out on patrols, their own patrols, and they zero in on an area they think is it, and then you do a dramatic task with the party that represents 4 weeks of them following up leads and scouting the areas to find the actual headquarters. My group, they thought they were going to fail it, but they didn't. They actually made it in the end by more than they needed. And each point they failed this dramatic task by was going to make the vampires that much more prepared because they knew the fight was coming. However, my group ended up with pretty much having the drop on them. And when we get to the last fight, it could be a big one. It could be a really big one. You've got 2 pits full of staked vampires, total of 120 vampires there. You've got another secondary vampire per hero. Secondary vampires staked, you have 2 per hero, and they're staked not because somebody was trying to kill them. They're in these pits around the compound, or the caverns that is the headquarters for the Deathspike. So the vampires that are staked there are basically in stasis waiting for when they need them to do a big fight or do a big attack. They'll unstake the vampires and then boom, they're out of stasis. They got instant army. It's a pretty efficient way to deal with that if you think about it. However, again, we're talking 120, then 1 secondary per hero, and then staked, you've got 2 secondaries per hero, you got 2 human soldiers per hero, 1 orderly per vampire, and you have information in here on how to handle it if they do a daytime attack, or if they do a nighttime attack, which, why you would intentionally attack a vampire stronghold at night is beyond me. I've never understood that in movies. No, it's 20 minutes till dark. Let's go into this creepy castle. No, hell no. Let's wait till tomorrow. But anyway, I digress. We ended up, you could put all these miniatures on the table and do this massive fight that would take quite a while to do. It would look really cool though. However, I don't want to. It would take all night for us to do that, and I just didn't want to do the fight. So we used what they also give you in here, the option to do it as a big quick encounter, a dangerous quick encounter. So we ran it like that, which the players failed their stealth in round 2, and all hell broke loose and fighting. But they still ended up beating the quick encounter, which meant they had fought their way into the Death Spike interior, the pool rooms, which the layout of the map looks like that, and they were trying to get to the command center. So they did end up getting to the command center, or right outside of it, and fighting a bunch of these. There were some secondary vampires in there that had been brought up from the sleeping chambers. They came out to fight the heroes. Well, in the secondary, in the control center, there is a vampire familiar from Isiltz. He's visiting from there. He is in the command center inspecting things, and the vampire familiar is a representation, a physical representation out in the wild of the vampire intelligence is projected by him. And it's nasty. It's this giant bat monster, which I didn't have a miniature for, but I had a big demon miniature from 40K or whatever that I could use, and I used it. But he had some pretty nasty abilities. They did end up taking him down, but it was not an easy fight. Once they finally beat him, they ended up with a bunch of additional credits worth of salvage and information that the Death Spike was a joint operation by the Mexico, Milta, and Isiltz kingdoms. They were to adopt modern human practices to fulfill their purposes. The main goal was to destroy Doc Reed and the Rangers, but they also gather information on other human settlements, other groups like this one, directly attack specific targets. Attacks are aimed to deplete resources of their enemies, remove them from strategic locations, and acquire resources, especially slaves. After securing the area, this force planned on a direct assault of Fort Reed. They acquired information about Fort Reed and the Rangers, including their outer defenses. They had hoped to plant a few thralls inside the fort to get more information, but it only had 2 successes, both unnamed. Well, we know that Dirk was one of them, but that's a nice little adventure hook there that there's still a spy in Fort Reed, and we don't know who it is. A successful attack on Fort Reed would remove any organized resistance north of the kingdoms. The vampires' plan to install supply lines included resting places for their army, and from there they could expand into the Pecos Empire and beyond. The players in my group did end up shutting this operation down. That's not necessarily to say they were the only Death Spikes. Surely there are more outposts like this. But it did end the story. And that's pretty much how the entire thing went. Now, again, like I said, there's a couple of the combats in here that I felt like were really heavy-handed towards the vampires. Mainly that one where they attacked that walled outpost. And that vampire familiar at the end is no joke. He is nasty. So be careful with him. If you run this, you could very easily kill multiple players with him. He's a beast. So, at the end of the day, what did I think about it? First of all, I'm going to go back to say this is not about the entire book, because I love the book. The book is literally my favorite. The campaign, it wasn't bad. We enjoyed it. We had a good time with it. There were a few problems that I found with some of the encounters just being too powerful. And I know that's a weird term to use in a RIFTS game, but it was. They were just overpowered. But all in all, it was still fun. And even when I talked to my players after the game, they felt the same way. They were like, okay, well, there's a couple of encounters that if it wasn't for some of my special house rules, they didn't feel like they would have succeeded. But they did succeed, and at the end of the day, they all had a good time. Everybody enjoyed it. They still want to do more, so it definitely didn't drive them away. So we did have fun with it. The one thing that I say, and I think they agreed too, was once you left Ciudad Juarez and got out into the wilds, it almost, without you writing your own stuff and putting it in to change this, it almost seemed like it became a weekly vampire fight. Like that was all there really was to it. There was very little story advancement. It was more fight every week with vampires. And I get it, you're out in the wilds, that can happen. My group wanted a little more role play, and from our perspective playing through the campaign, I think we could have done with an entire campaign just on Ciudad Juarez, just where they are in that city and very seldom even leave the city, because you have all these different factions that are operating from the executive circle to the guard and all these different people there for them to interact with. That would be a really interesting campaign, and one that I may actually do with my players at some point. I might write one for them to play like that, because they really wanted to explore an interesting location more like that. Again, not dissing on the adventure, on the campaign as a whole. It's just that part was also really well written, and they enjoyed that. So whoever wrote that, good job. I enjoyed running it. I enjoyed having the different factions to play around with. I just wish we had done more of it. And I get it. As Game Master, I could have decided, okay, well, we're just going to kind of keep it here. But I was trying to push the story forward and keep the momentum going for them to, feel we need to get to Fort Reed. We need to try to make contact with Doc Reed. We need to find out what's going on with these daytime vampires. And in order to do that, they couldn't just hang around Ciudad Juarez. They had to get out into the wilds, which turned into a lot of episodes of combat, basically. And while combat is not bad in of itself, my group also enjoys quite a bit of role play. Most of my group enjoys quite a bit of role play. So I think, again, doing an adventure or a big adventure or even a mini campaign just set in the city would have been cool, and I might still do that. But like I said, I've got ideas for other campaigns that I want to do, whether they're long or short, visiting some of the other places on Rifts Earth. But I assure you, at some point, I will be coming back to the Vampire Kingdoms. And though I probably won't run this campaign again, I might steal some ideas out of it for things that I would do. And I wouldn't run it again, because mainly I play with the same players, and I don't want to run them through the same story over and over. But it was fun. We had a ton of laughs. There was a couple of nights where there was some aggravation because of the combats, but overall everybody gave it a thumbs up, so we were all really happy with it. So yeah, if you're going to run it, I would advise scaling the combats back a little bit. And if you have a group that likes role-playing, maybe insert in between adventures some opportunities for them to do more role-playing, especially once they're out of Ciudad Juarez and they can go and explore and not just fight. They could run into other things, which obviously you could do. So yeah, at the end of the day, I'm gonna give it 2 thumbs up. It was a good campaign. I enjoyed it. The Birchers did a really good job. Did I say that name right? Because I hate to feel like I might have Birchers. Yeah, they did a really good job with the book. They did, whoever did the campaign, if they did the campaign, they did a good job with the campaign. There are a couple of little tweaks here and there, like I said, but I mean, that's, that could just be my group and the way we handled it. Your mileage may vary depending on how you and your group like to play. But I hope that you enjoyed this look at it and my final thoughts on it. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to put them into the comment section below, and I will try to answer them when I can. Until next time, good gaming, and stay the hell out of Mexico, away from the vampires. Good luck.